Technology, Dharwad, IIIT DWD. He completed his PhD in Electronics and Electrical Engineering Department from Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, in the year 2016. His thesis is titled as Foreground Speech Segmentation and Enhancement, and he has done his degree under the supervision of Professor S.R.M. Prasad. He received the Bachelor of Engineering degree in Instrumentation Technology from Malnad College of Engineering, University of Mysore in Hassan. So in the year 1999, and his master's degree in Biomedical Instrumentation from SJ College of Engineering, Mysuru under Vishweshwara Technological University in the 2002. So prior to his job, he was worked as technical leader at NXP Semiconductors Bangalore from the year 2016 to 2017. He worked as senior project engineer in ST Electronics Bangalore from the year 2005 to 2010. Which mainly focusing on audio post processing algorithms for the digital television group. To his credits is having a lot of papers published in various journals and international conferences. So today we are eager to see that learn about the Gaussian mixture modeling and hidden Markov modeling, and also we have a lab session from sir also. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, good morning to all participants.
Good morning, sir.
Nice to know, like there are around more than 60 participants, if I'm correct. Am I correct in my assumption?
Yes, sir. Presently they have logged in 63. Totally, we are having 128, sir.
Oh, okay. So that's nice to have. And hopefully most of them are from the background of computer science and electronics related branches, if I'm correct.
Yes, sir.
And my assumption is the participants are combination of teaching fraternity, research scholars, master graduate, MTech students.
Yes.
Is that correct with
Yes,
my
sir.
assumption, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So keeping that background in view, so in this particular session, I'm thinking to take you through some of the machine learning concept, especially with reference to the speech and speech recognition, especially. That is what I would like to take you through. So in the process, like I'll introduce you to the algorithms like K nearest neighborhood classifier, Gaussian mixture model, then hidden Markov model. With the limitation in mind, of course, I may not delve deep into the algorithms that actually goes to make this work. But to an extent, like I'll try to introduce you to the topics of these things, and eventually keeping this talk as a basis. In the workshop session, which is also of 1.5 hour, we will try to build the system. Even before trying to build the system, I'll demonstrate you what elements or what algorithms basically that goes in order to realize the automatic speech recognition. So which I'll demonstrate you through the MATLAB. Then eventually uh, uh, one of my associates, Shruti, so she'll help us to realize the automatic speech recognition, the simplest one to begin with, using Kaldi speech recognition toolkit. So that is the whole plan. So keeping this in view, let us go through the things. Some of the reference materials I've used to prepare this talk. The one is it's wonderful NPTEL videos, especially by Professor Sukhendu Das, Department of Computer Science, IIT Madras, and Professor C.A. Murthy, ISI Kolkata. So anyone who want to delve into this machine learning perspective of speech and speech recognition, certainly have to go through these videos. Of course, in specific, they have not dealt with the speech domain per se, but nevertheless, in general, you get to know the algorithms behind that actually make this ASA work. So this is one material. Another good paper to read through is non-parametric estimate of a multivariate density function by Lofts Garden. So this is one paper that is available. You people can refer this material. Then I've also referred some of the slides from Simplilearn. I've taken those slides because it's very easy and intuitive to understand certain complex algorithms in a very simplistic fashion. So some of them I've taken from this Simplilearn uh, website as well. Then expectation maximization. I've referred this particular video. You people also can refer to it. It's a nice video to refer, and it gives a clear understanding of how this expectation maximization, especially with reference to Gaussian mixture model, it works. So this is one thing. Then there is one more good paper to refer with, especially Gaussian mixture models by Douglas Reynolds. You can also refer this particular tutorial. It's a nice paper to refer. Then apart from that, like you can refer pattern classification by Richard Duda, Peter Hart, and David Stock. So it's one of the classic books for pattern classification and recognition. And there's a pattern recognition book and machine learning by Christopher M. Bishop. It's a good material. It's a good book to refer, certainly. And there are slides that are uh, uh, done by Professor Samudra Vijaya sir. So these are some of the materials that I've referred especially to prepare this particular talk. So coming to machine learning, of course, this word has caught up so heavily, both in academics as well as the corporate industry. So it's not without a reason, because most of the problems which were thought to be unsolved using the classical approach, essentially using the rule-based approaches, be it computer vision, speech, audio, you name it, some of the biggest challenges, uh, we are able to see certain solutions, and also to an extent, like these solutions have become commercially viable solutions. So thanks to the machine learning, when I say machine learning, deep learning is also is part of the machine learning. So keeping that in view, so now it's quite possible to develop solutions for uh, most of the complicated solutions that were regarded as only the bastion of biological creatures. Now machines are also able to solve certain complicated problems. Of course, there's a big way to go before even we say the machines are as intelligent as humans, or even to that extent some animals. So there's a long way to go. Nevertheless, uh, in the perspective of speech, certainly there's a big stride that has happened in the domain. And now, as we all know, the speech recognition as one of the modules for many applications, like be it Siri or Amazon Echo. And many such applications, like say in medical transcription. Most of these places, automatic speech recognition is one of the important modules that enables us to find the solutions for the given problem. Now, before even getting to know about the algorithms that goes actually to make this ASR work, let us get to know how does this machine learning model works. Say, for instance, if we can generate certain trained models from the machine learning, for that, if we give any unknown input value, so the machine learning model will be able to help us to predict what is that particular input value is all about. So when I say predict, it could be the classification problem, it could be a mapping problem, it could be any such machine learning related problems that this machine learning can solve. Whereas mostly what we are interested in this particular session is the classification. So what classification are we mostly interested? In fact, like we are mostly interested in speech classification. So there are fundamental units as far as the speech is concerned. In a sense, the speech is made up of many such fundamental units called as phonemes or to an extent, like you can also regard syllable as the fundamental units. So sequentially, when we connect all these fundamental units, basically it generates the speech. So coming with one of the simplest algorithm to begin with is the K nearest neighborhood classifier. It is a supervised machine learning algorithm. Then what it does, it helps us to classify the unknown data point that is fed as an input to this classification algorithm. So outcome of this particular algorithm is that it puts that unknown data point into one of the classes. So a priori, we know how many classes that we are interested in. Then this K nearest neighborhood algorithm is trained to classify the unknown input data point into one of those classes. So that is how it gets trained. So let's essentially begin with the basics of machine learning through this K nearest neighborhood classifier. Then eventually we lay out some of the drawbacks this particular algorithm has, and then try to address some of those issues that we find it in this particular algorithm. So let's go to that K nearest neighborhood algorithm. Let's say we have xi and theta I as where theta I is the parameter theta I is the label for the given data point, that is xi. Xi is the input data point. So what do we mean by data point? Most likely when we talk about a data point with reference to signal processing, we tend to regard this xi as a feature vector. So of course, it is possible for us to feed the signal as it is without even extracting the feature. But nonetheless, there will be a lot of redundancy as far as the data itself is concerned. So hence, we need to extract the relevant information out of the given signal and convert them into a set of feature vectors. So then that won't be one such feature vector, but it will be a sequence of such feature vectors. So here in this case, xi forms to be one such feature vector, and theta I is the corresponding label. Say for instance, label could be anything. So say for instance, if it is a gender classification, then I'll be interested whether the input feature vector belongs to a particular class, like let's say whether it is boy or a girl. So boy or a girl definition stands out to be the label of that particular feature vector. And feature vector need not be one single value, but it can be a sequence of value of having certain dimension. So so this is where that dimension comes into picture. So feature vector can anywhere be having one or greater number of dimensions, and that belongs to certain Euclidean space of dimension m. So that is what we mean by r to the power of m. So it's a space what I'm talking about. That means xi belongs to a space of dimension m. So again, I can vary anywhere between 1 to small number of n. So I told you what is this xi is all about. Xi points belongs to the m dimensional Euclidean space. So likewise, the corresponding label, that is theta I, uh, belongs to one of the class labels. So there might be G number of classes or C number of classes. Sorry, there might be C number of classes. So this that particular feature vector corresponds to one of those class labels. So that is what we mean by the feature vector and its corresponding labels. So as I told, C corresponds to the number of classes. Most likely, we are interested when the classes are greater than or equal to 2. Why? Because C is equal to 1 is a trivial case. So any number of features all belongs to one particular class. Then there is no essentiality of classifying that particular data. So the challenge arises when the number of classes is greater than or equal to 2. That's where the challenge arises, and we need to categorize the incoming unknown feature vector into one of those classes. So don't worry about what do we mean by feature vector. Certainly, I'll explain you it with reference to the speech data. But let us begin with any general data for that matter, then slowly proceed towards the speech feature vector extraction of a given data. So then, as I told, this theta I belongs to one of those classes, and those classes vary anywhere between 1 to C, and and they belong to that I, where I is varying from 1 to n, small n. Now let us say we get a feature vector x. So I'm talking about the vector. So x be some point for which the label is not known. A priori, we don't know what is the label of the corresponding feature vector is all about. Now the challenge at hand is that I need to put this unknown feature vector point into one of those classes. So that is the problem at hand, and that is what the challenge that we try to address in this particular session. So let's define the procedure of how do we address this particular problem, right? So let's take k, let k be any positive integer, and let us define the distance between the unknown feature vector and some of the earlier known vectors, basically, as d. So d basically establishes the distance between the unknown vector and to that of the known vectors I have at hand, right? So then they all belong to that particular I, and that I can vary anywhere between 1 to n, where here, so let k be any positive integer. So the k nearest neighborhood tells that essentially we need to calculate the distance between the a priori known vectors that I have at hand and the unknown feature vector. So the distance between these two vectors can be calculated by using simple Euclidean distance. Course, it need not be limited by the Euclidean distance. It can be any other distance metrics that we have at hand. But in general, to keep our problem simple, and especially with reference to k nearest neighborhood, Euclidean distance is the metric that we tend to measure between the unknown and the known feature vector. So once we have calculated all those distances with reference to xi, then we'll have n such distances. Why? Because we have n such number of vectors at hand. So what do we mean by vectors at hand? They're all nothing but the training data. So we have those training data with us. So we'll calculate all the Euclidean distance between the unknown and the known feature vectors we have. So we get n number of distances. And if at all we arrange all those n number of distances in a non-decreasing fashion, or simply speaking, in an increasing fashion, so we now you take that first k distances into consideration, and henceforth the name corresponds to k nearest neighborhood classifier. So what does that k corresponds to? Now we can appreciate. So k corresponds to some positive integer value. Say if we had 100 such training vectors at my hand, and if I get one unknown feature vector, I'll calculate all the Euclidean distance with reference to 100, then totally I'll have 100 distances between the unknown and the known feature vectors. Now if I arrange them in the non-decreasing or the increasing order, if I take top k distances, what do I get? Correspondingly, I get all the k vectors which corresponds to the lowest distance from the unknown feature vector. That's what I'll get it, right? So then find those k points corresponding to these k distances, and if suppose in those k, let's say, let me define that k as say some 5, right? So of those 5 distances, majority of those 5 belongs to one of those class, let's say that is class I. Then I assign the unknown feature vector to that corresponding class. right? So class I is what I label that unknown feature vector to, right? So that if I want to put that in the condition, so put x, that is unknown feature vector, in class I if at all ki is greater than kj for all j is not equal to I. So this is in principle how we define the k nearest neighborhood classifier. So it basically puts into one of those classes. Now all those problems may arise. Say for instance, if I've considered 5k points in this k nearest neighborhood, and if all those 5 belongs to independent classes, then which class I should be putting this particular unknown feature vector to, which class it belongs to? Then quite logically speaking, so whichever gives us the shortest distance, then that particular unknown feature vector belongs to that particular class. So that is the way to proceed as far as this k nearest neighborhood classifier is concerned. So as an example, let us consider that we have 3 different classes, so which are marked as x, v, and black dots. So they're also color coded. Now let us say I get an unknown feature vector which is denoted by this dot. Now I need to classify this unknown feature vector into one of those classes. Now going by this k nearest neighborhood classifier, here if we tend to define the parameters, let's take that k is equal to 3. So then number of classes in this particular problem is 3, right? Why? It is cross, v, and dot. So essentially this c is equal to 3 in this particular problem. Now these are the 3 classes which are represented by symbols. Now let's say I want to calculate the distance with all those unknown, the unknown feature vector with reference to all those known training vectors I have at hand. So if suppose I have 4 plus 2 plus 3, which is correspondingly 9 such feature vectors, what I have, training vectors I have. So let's take that unknown feature vector and try to calculate the distance between all those 9 and arrange them in the increasing order and take top 3 shortest distance of those distances I've calculated, and that corresponds to some class. Say for instance, if I take that k is equal to 3, so in those 3, the cross symbols, the 2 cross symbols, and 1 v symbol corresponds to the shortest distance from the unknown feature vector. So then in those, the majority of the samples in that k belongs to this class, that is cross, whereas one of the sample in that k is equal to 3 belongs to the class v. So now which class I need to assign my unknown feature vector to? So as per the algorithm that I defined in the previous slide, the unknown feature vector shall be classified as the cross. Why? Because the kx, which corresponds to 2, and k dot, wherein we don't have representation of that vector at all, because it's not coming well within that 3, right? So then kv, which corresponds to 1. So obviously here kx is greater than kv is also greater than k dot. So henceforth I put the x unknown feature vector to this class x. I assign this particular unknown feature vector to this class x. So this is how I can use k nearest neighborhood algorithm to classify the unknown feature vector into one of those classes, or in general we can use the k nearest neighborhood algorithm to the classification problem. Now how this corresponds to the natural data. So let's take very simple toy
Excuse me, sir.
example. Yeah, hello.
Sir, if in this example we take k is equal to 4,
Mhm.
then what will be the class? Because kx equal to 2 and kb equal to also equal to 2.
Right. So generally speaking, we tend to take the odd number of k values, even if we take the even number of k values. So as I quoted in the previous slide, if suppose I have only one representation of each of those values, then obviously I have to rely on the distance value itself, not only going by the number of samples that I have in a given class, but I also have to measure if suppose I've arranged it in a increasing order, the one which gives me the shortest distance from the unknown feature vector, that is the natural class that I classify this particular unknown feature vector into. So that is one solution. Hope that has answered your question.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So then let's take a toy example. Of course, it may not be that simple when it actually comes to the actual visual data. But here deliberately we have kept it as a toy example so that like understanding becomes clearer. So for instance, if we take cats and dogs, so what do we mean by features that I need to extract? So for instance, some of the features which helps me to distinguish the cats and dogs is what I look for. Say for instance, cats have got sharper claws and they use it to climb the tree, and they have smaller length of ears, whereas when it comes to dogs, like they have bigger length of ears, and also the sound the cats make, the sound the dogs make. So they cats don't play around much, whereas dogs like to play around us basically. So these are some of the hallmark features which actually helps us to distinguish between the cats and dogs. Now these will be the types of features what we need to essentially look for in order to classify the cats and dogs. So this is how I can arrange. Let's take only two such features. Why? Because it's easy to represent it on a two-dimensional plane and easy for us to infer like how does the cluster form. Say for instance, length of ears and sharpness of the claws. So if I do take, most likely the dogs will have a lengthier ears, whereas like cats will have a sharper claws. Is it always that, like in a practical scenario? No. So there will be some overlapping cases. That's where the challenge of machine learning comes. If the features itself would have given us a clear separation of the data, then there was no necessity of applying the machine learning algorithm at all. The challenge would be such that the features per se doesn't give us directly the classification ability. So because many such features do tend to overlap. So there might be dogs with sharper claws. Likewise, there might be some cats which are having lengthier ears. So wherein that's the kind of challenge we generally tend to see when we want to classify even some simple natural existing data. So that's one of the challenges we have at hand. So that's where this machine learning algorithms comes into picture. Say for instance, if we get a new feature vector, based on this features, I need to assign it to one of the class labels. So here the class labels are cats and dogs. So how do I go about that? So let me apply that k is equal to 5. So I have to consider 5 such short distance with reference to the known feature vectors and to that of the unknown feature vector. And obviously in this particular problem, 4 of the 5 uh, uh, training vectors belongs to the class category of cats, and one of them belongs to the class category of dog. Henceforth, the unknown symbol or unknown feature vector does gets classified as cat in general. So that is what happens in this case. So now what we did, so in essence, like what actually this k nearest neighborhood did, basically it tried to calculate the feature similarity within within known features that I had previously stored with reference to cats and dogs. And since the distance between those two were short with reference to cats, so I most likely categorize this particular unknown feature vector and its corresponding features to the cat category rather than the dog category. So this was a mere toy example that we did consider. Now, how do we take this problem to a speech related problem? That's where our speech comes into picture. So all these while we were talking about feature vector, let's see how do we extract those features with reference to speech signal. That's what we'll be quite interested. By far, the Kepstrel based analysis is the one through which like we tend to extract the features from the speech signal, and all these while even to this day, by far these Kepstrel features are the one which are extensively used in the domain of speech recognition, speaker recognition, and also to some extent there are certain variations with reference to these Kepstrel features called as Mel Kepstrel coefficients and so on, which also do get essentially used in speech synthesis as well. So to that extent, like it is of quite an interest to know of how these features are extracted and what is the nature of those features that we try to extract from the signal. So people, especially who are familiar with signal processing, may find it relatively easier to understand. But nevertheless, people who don't have such background, I'll also make things a little easier and keep it at abstract level so that we get to know what do we mean by features and how do we extract them from the signal. So now, before even going into Kepstrel analysis, so what is the job of a feature extraction is all about? So the job of a feature extraction, as I told, need to throw out all the unnecessary information that particular data has and retain only the necessary information that essentially helps us to realize a given application. Say, for instance, if we take a speech signal, what all different information that particular speech signal can possess? In fact, like it has got the gender information. Also, to an extent, if we listen to the speech, we can make out like what particular age bracket this particular speaker is all about. And also, to an extent, we can make out what emotional state that particular person is in, right? So then also, to an extent, like we can make out what kind of background he's speaking from. Say, for instance, is it a noisy market area, or is it a traffic road, or is he speaking in a wide open hall? Is there a lot of reverberation, echo? So all such information is all embedded in the speech signal. It's a wealth of information that is there in the given speech signal. So now, in order to recognize the speech or the spoken content, I am least bothered about which gender he or she is from, right? I'm least bothered about like what is the background is all about, and also I'm not interested in the kind of emotional state that particular person is in, right? So we need to try and discard all this information from the given speech signal. So how do we discard them? How do we discard them so that we only retain useful information to recognize what is the spoken content is all about? So that is the challenge at hand. So if at all we will be able to do 100% rightful job as far as this right feature extraction from the speech signal, as I said earlier, machine learning algorithms become redundant, but it's not an easy task to throw out irrelevant information and only extract the relevant information from the signal. That's one of the key challenges why we have to rely on feature extraction to get the relevant information from the speech signal and pass it as an input to the machine learning algorithm. Yeah. So coming to Kepstrel analysis, this is what it says. If x of n is digital data and it's a time domain signal to which like we tend to apply the Fourier transform, take the log magnitude spectrum, and to which like if we tend to apply the inverse Fourier transform, right? The inverse discrete Fourier transform. So then we tend to get the Kepstrom. So essentially, so if we tend to expand this particular equation, we know what is the basis function of a Fourier transform is. It is e to the power of minus j2 pi by n, kn multiplied, this particular kernel gets multiplied by the x of n. Internally, it is nothing but a dot product. So summate over n minus 1. So that is where we get the Fourier transform. Now, on top, you take the log. If you take the magnitude alone and throw out the phase information, it's as good as extracting the magnitude spectrum from the given signal. So then apply the nonlinear function, say log on top of this, that becomes the log magnitude spectrum, to which like you again apply the inverse discrete Fourier transform, whose basis function is all given by e to the power of j2 pi by n k. So then summate over all the samples that I have is C of n. So in general, if I put it in terms of block diagram, this is what essentially happens with reference to Kepstrom extraction, right? Pass that x of n, which is the time domain signal. Here in this case, it is mostly the speech, what we're talking about. We get x of k, which is nothing but the discrete Fourier transform coefficients. So from which like we can extract the magnitude. We know how do we, so they're nothing but the complex coefficients. So how do we extract how do we calculate the magnitude spectrum? Take that complex coefficient, which is of the form a plus jb. So root of a square plus b square gives me the magnitude of that particular coefficient. Likewise, I get n number of coefficients. It depends on the size of the Fourier transform that I've taken, and also the resolution I would like to extract the magnitude spectrum. So to which like if I apply the log, that becomes the log magnitude spectrum, pass it through the IDFT, I get the Kepstrom. So now pictorially, in the sense of graph, how does this spectrum looks like? For instance, here it is the magnitude spectrum of one particular frame of data. So x-axis corresponds to the frequency and y-axis corresponds to the magnitude. Now to which like if I apply the log, that becomes the log magnitude spectrum. So it boosts up the y-axis in a non-linear fashion. So wherein now you can notice it has boosted the high frequency components. In a sense, there is variation with reference to the dynamic range, right? So that's what happens when I apply the log. Now on top, if I do apply the uh, uh, inverse discrete Fourier transform, the nature of the signal becomes like this, and this is what we call it as the Kepstrom. So Kepstrom, there is no notion of nor time nor frequency. It's intermediate to those two, and henceforth we tend to represent them in the number of number of samples. And broadly speaking, you can notice there are two major peaks that are there in the Kepstrom. So essentially, what does it represent? So if we look at the magnitude spectrum, it has got a finer structure. On top of it lies the envelope. So it's as good as uh, nothing but the amplitude modulation. There are finer structure. On top there is an envelope which is modulated by the low frequency component with reference to the magnitude spectrum. I'm not speaking with reference to the time, right? So then we tend to take that. Then there are low Q frequency components and there are high Q frequency components. So I'm least interested, at least with reference to the speech recognition, with these high fluctuations, because they essentially represent the pitch and its corresponding harmonics. So which basically tells me what gender he is, what is the pitch range he has or she has. So I am least interested in that. Whereas I am majorly interested in this particular envelope. Why? Because this envelope pattern is the one, if I could recognize, I can essentially classify this particular pattern to one of those fundamental units, as I explained earlier. It could be phoneme, it could be syllable, whatever be the fundamental unit. So looking at this envelope, I can classify which corresponding sound unit it belongs to. So this is the pattern recognition which I'm mostly interested as far as the speech recognition is concerned. So in a sense, I'll be more interested in the low Q frequency components rather than high Q frequency components, right? So then apply a filter on top of this Kepstrom to discard the high Q frequency components and retain only the low Q frequency components. So that's what happens. Yeah. So this is what the filtering, of course, we don't tend to call them as filtering. Why? Because everything is nor time nor frequency. Henceforth, like we tend to call them as liftering. So it is called as low liftering and high liftering. So if at all we want to have high Q frequency components to be retained, then I have to apply the high liftering. If I have to retain the low Q frequency components, then I have to apply the low low liftering. Basically, this is it's as good as low pass filtering. So that's what we do. And retaining only the low Q frequency, if I do invert back to the spectrum, basically I would have extracted the envelope of the given spectrum, because this is what I'm interested to recognize, right? That is what I'm essentially interested in. This problem essentially is nothing but a deconvolution problem. So why do we say it as a deconvolution problem? Because the speech production system. So what does a speech production system consists of? It consists of the ocal tract. It consists of, it consists of the ocal folds, and it consists of the ocal tract, and there are lips through which the speech gets radiated. So combine all these three different terms. Essentially, it boils down that glottal source forms the excitation, and it need not be, all the speech sounds need not be excited with this glottal source. So there are non-glottal source excitation as well, as far as the speech is concerned, especially if we take fricatives and consonants. So the excitation signal is not the glottal source. There the excitation source is the puff of air when it comes to fricatives like fa, sa, sha, right? So likewise, if we take the consonants, k, right, the excitation is not from the vocal fold. There is no voicing over there. But in general, at least for the sake of understanding, it's easier to understand the voice sounds first, and the same analogy can be extended to the unvoiced sounds like fricatives and consonants as well. So then essentially the speech signal boils down as that: take the glottal source signal U of n, convolve with the vocal tract V of n, and that in turn gets convolved with the lip radiation, that is R of n. So convolution of these three different signals essentially leads rise to the speech signal, that is Y of n. So it's very difficult to deconvolve the signal in the time domain. We know, especially people who have worked on signal processing, we know like how difficult it is to deconvolve when we don't know, when we don't have any one of those signals, because we can't essentially tap the glottal source, nor we can tap the vocal tract, nor we can tap the lip radiation. In a practical scenario, we straight away talk to microphone, and everything is all convolved already in the signal. Only way to deconvolve is using such techniques called as homomorphic filtering techniques. So what does that do? Like, so though it's not possible in the time domain, so rather let's get into the transform domain, especially let's say Fourier transform domain. Now here in this case, the magnitude, the convolution now turns out to be the multiplication. On top, like if you tend to apply the log, the multiplication factor turns out to be addition. So it's now the signal is resolved into two components. Of course, here for simplicity, the lip radiation and vocal tract is combined to form that V dash, and U remains as the excitation. Now it's good, like at least it's better to handle than convolution. Convolution is quite complicated, right? So now essentially it has boiled down to two such terms which are added together. That is excitation and the vocal tract are added in terms of transform domain. So this itself is what we call it as the Kepstrom. So in Kepstrom domain, there are additive components. Yeah, this more or less like I've explained what it is. Yeah, so this is what happens. So as I told, liftering. So liftering of 10 components will give me a very smooth variation, very smooth variation. As you tend to here, don't get confused with the K, whatever we discussed with reference to K nearest neighborhood. Here K corresponds to the number of Q-frequency coefficients with which I'm reconstructing back the magnitude spectrum, and how does it look like. So as you keep on varying the number of K, so we are almost approaching closer to the original magnitude spectrum itself. So that then spectrum to represent it as a feature, right? It as a feature. So that like I'll be able to classify that particular pattern. Yeah, so I can skip this homomorphic filtering. Essentially, I did explain what happened with reference to that. So then apart from that, we have to introduce one more concept to this one. So of course, this is one such short time Kepstra, basically. So it's a sequence of frames of data. Say, for instance, if I've uttered a, e, u, whatever the verbal. So it doesn't go by one such frame. Why? Because typically to apply all our signal processing techniques on top of this speech, there are two things that we tend to assume. One is that it is a stationarity assumption is there, and that's where if we want to assume it to be stationary, we can't take length of the signal to be too large. So we tend to usually fix it at 20 milliseconds to 25 milliseconds. So that's the typical length of the audio or speech frames that we tend to process. So take such frames. So at times we take it as non-overlapping frames. At times we can take it as overlapping frames. So for simplicity, you assume that we are taking non-overlapping frames as far as the signal is concerned. So take that particular frame, um, process it through the Kipstrom analysis. So each such frame, it's the stack of such frames forms the stack of such Kipstra basically. So here we can notice, especially when it is voiced frames, there is voicing, there is a pitch basically. So when there are no such voicing, especially when it comes to fricative and consonants, of course there is broader envelope structure, but the voicing pattern is lost. That is quite evident in the Q frequency. So which may not be so evident in the frequency domain, which is now has become evident in the Q frequency domain. So in a sense, these frames are unvoiced frames. That's okay. I mean, we are mostly interested in this pattern as far as the speech recognition is concerned, the low Q frequency components. So that's where this feature called as MEL frequency Kipstral coefficient comes into picture. Not only that we want to deconvolve the source from that of the filter. So when I say filter, it is the Ockeltrach filter. Basically, Ockeltrach filter has modulated the voiced excitation. That's how the speech gets generated, right? This is the frame-based processing, what I was talking about. Here, there is 75% overlap. So each frame is of size 25 milliseconds, and there's a 10 milliseconds shift, or that much amount of overlap is there. Anyway, so don't worry about that. So this is the feature extraction block diagram. So first of all, we apply the pre-emphasis, and then we try to apply the window. Why we have to apply the window? Because there's a Gibbs effect. In order to avoid that, we either apply the Hamming or Hanning window. We don't use the rectangular window. Then apply the discrete Fourier transform. Then on top, like you apply the MEL filter bank. There we go. Then apply the log and then calculate the IDFT. We get the MEL frequency Kipstral coefficient, and we take the delta and delta delta coefficients in order to match the dynamics of those speech signal. Anyway, let us not get into the details of it, because it's not quite possible to cover everything, right? So anyway, I'll skip this pre-emphasis. Also, windowing, we know, people who have really worked on signal processing, we know what is the difference between rectangular and Hamming window is all about. Sorry. Then apply the DFT, discrete Fourier transform, extract the magnitude, then apply the MEL filter bank. What is that MEL filter bank is? So we have certain audibility filter bands like in our cochlear inner ear. So in a sense, that cochlear is divided into number of critical bands, basically. That's how we perceive the speech. Henceforth, like the feature extraction also relies on the way the human hearing happens. That's where we tend to apply the MEL frequency scale rather than the linear frequency scale that we tend to usually apply. So this is the x-axis denotes the frequency linear scale, and the y-axis corresponds to the frequency in MEL scale. So if we look at the mapping, so this is how the mapping has happened, and it has happened in a non-linear fashion. So it's no more linear. In a sense, most of the frequencies, the lower frequencies, have got a larger representation in the MEL scale, whereas when it comes to higher frequencies, most of these higher frequencies are mapped to lower range of the frequencies in the MEL scale. And this is how we tend to perceive using our human ears. In a sense, we have better resolution in the low frequency and lower resolution in the high frequency. So henceforth, this log magnitude spectrum, we do apply these triangular filters, which closely corresponds to the human listening ability, wherein you can notice that we have got a better resolution in the low frequency components and lower resolution in the high frequency components. So this is what we tend to call it as the MEL frequency scale and the MEL filter banks. So we apply these MEL filter banks on top of the spectrum, and each of those coefficients, whatever we get, we tend to apply the log and then apply the inverse discrete Fourier transform. That's when we tend to derive the feature MEL frequency Kepstrel coefficient, and we usually tend to retain first 13 coefficients of those filter banks, and tend to discard other high frequency details, especially with reference to the speech. Why? Because mostly we are focused on first, second, and third formants. So fourth and fifth formants, they don't tend to in a great way represent the speech content. So that's where we tend to retain first 13 MFCC coefficients, even though we do extract 22 such feature coefficients. We only retain those 13 and then calculate the delta and delta delta coefficients. Put together, it becomes a 39 dimensional feature vector. So essentially, we represent the features speech in terms of feature vectors. That is, we convert those frames into feature vectors. And once we extract those feature vectors, there we go. All the things, whatever we discussed with reference to K nearest neighborhood, then can be applied on the MFCC feature vectors as well. Yeah, so all these things I can skip. No need to get into the details of the feature extraction itself. So having extracted the features from the speech signal, now what do we do, right? So that's what we'll try to worry about. So now all these files, we were going with these short distance criteria. Imagine when we have lakhs and millions of frames, is it practically possible to measure all those distance and go with this K nearest neighborhood algorithm? Certainly it may not be a possible way to move forward, right? Because and also things may not be as simple as just utilizing the Euclidean distance with reference to the non-training vectors and the unknown feature vector. Why? Because speech is a highly complicated signal. So at times we find it difficult to distinguish the voiced sounds itself. So we tend to listen them in the telephone speech channel. So hardly we'll be able to notice like e, o, right? So very difficult to distinguish. And imagine the difficulty of a machine. Certainly, it is not possible just by going with this simplistic algorithm. So that is one of the challenge we have at hand. So that's where we bring Bayes theorem or probabilistic way of deciding which frames that particular sound units belong. I mean, which sound units that particular frames belongs to. So that's what we are moving towards. So let us take one simple example before explaining the Bayes theorem. So what does that Bayes theorem deals with? Basically, Bayes theorem deals with the conditional probability, basically. So for instance, here we are more interested, what is the probability of A happening provided the B has happened, right? So that is what we mean by the conditional probability, that is P probability of A given B. So how do we find out? We use the Bayes relationship to calculate what is this all about. What is this all about? So this is what we call it as the posterior probability. Posterior probability, that is P of A given B. So then we have unconditional probability, that is the that is P of B. So anyway, this is only the scaling factor which helps us to normalize the probability value. Apart that, the most important components which are the numerator, say the class prior probability itself, that is P of A, right? So then the conditional probability of B given A. So if we know these three terms, that is P of A, which are nothing but the prior probabilities, then the conditional probability, that is P of B given A, and also the unconditional probability, that is P of B. So then we can calculate what is the probability of A given B. Now, if I want to take it to our speech domain, so then a priori I can have, let's say I have to build the speech recognizer using a sequence of phoneme models. So what do we mean by phoneme? Phonemes, basically, it's the fundamental sound unit of the speech. Say, for instance, it could be a, o, k, j, t, t, p, right? So generally speaking, so some 30 to 35 or 40 odd phonemes will be used to build the speech recognizer. In a sense, we chunk the speech data into corresponding sound units and try to find out what are those corresponding sound units and arrange them in a sequential fashion, and then on top find out like what is the speech content that is spoken. So in order to do that, we require a priori trained models. That is, if we have one of those 40 models, now I get a unknown speech frame, let's say, then I have to assign that particular unknown speech frame to one of those 40 models or 40 classes that I have hand. So which I can efficiently do it in the base inference, rather than taking hard decisions that I took in case of k nearest neighborhood classifier. So we'll see, we'll come across like what do we mean by soft inference. So let's take that one simple example which helps us to understand more complicated problem like a speech. So let's take this simple example. So I have to calculate the probability of fire occurring, right? A fire happening, yeah. So and by what means, like I know a priori like what is the probability of a given smoke is. Now I have to calculate what is the conditional probability, that is probability of occurrence of fire given there is a smoke. So this is what I'm more interested in. And going by the past instances, I would have calculated what is the probability of smoke given a fire. I would have got this detail. Now, if I have this particular data with me, then it is easy to calculate this particular thing. So let's go by some of the numbers. Let's say dangerous fires are very rare and it happens only 1%. So that is the statement. So, but smoke is fairly common. So why? Because even while cooking, without even fire, the smoke can come out, right? That happens. That is around 10%, and 90% of the dangerous fires make smoke. So these are the statements. Now, if I want to calculate what is the probability of a fire given smoke, then I have to use the Bayes relationship. So given the prior probability, that is probability of fire itself, which is nothing but that 1%, and given that probability of smoke given fire, which is around 90%, so divided by the probability of the smoke itself, which corresponds to 10%. So put all those numbers to this Bayes relationship. There we go. We have calculated that probability of fire given smoke turns out to be 9%. That is, there is 9% of chance amongst all those smoke that I observe that there is a possibility of fire being caught in home, in a house, in an office, whatever. Yeah. So this is the beauty of the Bayes theorem, and this is how it helps us to come up with notional inference, like whether a fire will get caught, or in this case, likewise, I can draw that particular inference to the speech signal also. Right. So let's list down the drawbacks that we had in the k nearest neighborhood algorithm. One of the major drawbacks of the k nearest neighborhood is that it takes the hard decision. In a sense, I either categorize this particular unknown feature vector into one of those class. So I don't assign the soft decision. In a sense, I don't assign a probabilistic sense in the k nearest neighborhood classifier, and I take that hard decision. So what do I mean by hard decision? So generally I take the decision that this particular frame belongs to the sound unit A. No way it belong to the sound unit E. No way it can belong to sound unit A, right? So that is the problem with the K nearest neighborhood. And it's not possible, if even if we tend to listen one particular frame, it's not quite possible to make out like which particular sound unit it comes from. So we need a lot of other things before even we take a decision what this particular speech frame belongs to. So that's where this soft decision machine learning algorithms comes into picture. In that, Gaussian mixture model is one of the most prominent soft decision clustering algorithm that comes into picture when it comes to speech and speech related problems. So for instance, let's talk about the gender heights, say amongst Indians. If I do plot the probability density function, and if x-axis is all represented in terms of centimeters, so generally speaking, if I do tend to fit the PDF with the data that whatever I have, this is how the two PDFs look like. Basically, generally speaking, males are having the larger height, and on an average, like they're having 160 centimeters. Likewise, generally speaking, the female average height is around 150 centimeters. So this mean and the separation of these two Gaussians basically help separate the two classes. But nevertheless, there can be some overlapping cases also. Say, for instance, there can be taller females. Likewise, there can be shorter males. So then there is certain overlap. So taking a hard decision in such problems will end up in a trouble, like in case of K nearest neighborhood. Now, how do we overcome? So we can overcome by assigning a probability value for a given unknown feature vector to either it belongs to one of this PDF or the other PDF. So whether he is male or female, rather than saying that binary decision, rather than taking that binary decision, let me say 90% he is more likely a male and 10% is likely to be a female. So that's a safe decision to make, isn't it? That's a safe statement to make, right? So that's what essentially happens in case of Gaussian mixture models. That is what we'll try to see. How does that happen? Yeah. So there is a conditional probability density function, and we have prior probabilities which are known earlier. So if we have m number of classes, then we'll have m number of conditional density functions, basically, which are given by p1, p2 up to pm of x. And if we have a unknown feature vector x, it's same as that what we had taken in the k nearest neighborhood. And if it belongs to some n dimensional Euclidean space given by Rn. Now, if we know the prior probabilities, what do we mean by prior probabilities? Basically, so we can calculate those prior probabilities, and those probabilities will anywhere range from 0 to 1. So then summate all those prior probabilities, the sum value should turn out to be 1. In a sense, if suppose I have phonemes A, I've got many examples of phonemes A as the training vectors. Then some examples of O, some examples of U, right? Some examples of E. So then if I have 100 such training vectors at my disposal, if suppose some 50 frames belongs to vowel A, and 10 frames of E, 10 frames of R, 10 frames of A, then if I want to calculate the priors, then simply take that 50 divided by 100 will give me the prior probability of that particular vowel A, right? So, but if you tend to add all those probability values, it turns out to be 1. Why? Because it's after all the prior probabilities what I'm calculating. Now, so take the conditional density function which belongs to one of the m classes. Let's say ith class. Let's say if that particular unknown feature vector belongs to an I class. So if I have to classify that as an I, then I have to take the prior, that is pi, multiply it with the conditional density function, that is pi of x, and if this multiplied value is greater than or equal to some tj, then I tend to classify this unknown feature vector into the class J. Is that clear? So that is how I tend to classify the unknown feature vector as, basically. So this is how I've turned the base relationship into the classification problem, right? So again, in that, normal distribution is the one which we naturally tend to observe when it comes to most of the data that we happen to deal in day-to-day challenges. Say, for instance, it could be a pattern recognition, it could be machine learning, artificial neural networks, soft computing, DSP, image processing. To take any of these problems, it could be communications. So most of the data, they tend to fall under the category of this, under the category of a normal distribution or the Gaussian distribution in general. So speech is also, which is also not exceptional. It also comes under the category of this normal distribution or the Gaussian distribution. And how do we model a normal distribution? It is all modeled by this equation. So the equation of a normal distribution probability distribution function is all given by p of x, which is given as 1 over sigma root 2 pi exponential minus half to x minus mu divided by sigma square. Now, what are these? Sigma is the standard deviation, 2 pi is the constant under the root, then x is a vector, or it could be one single random variable, right? It could be a random variable in this case. So how far that random variable is deviating from the mean of the distribution, right? And normalized with reference to the standard deviation. So here, this term, that is 1 over sigma root 2 pi, is the scalar value. So it basically helps us to normalize the Gaussian curve under the area having a 1, right? So that's what this particular thing helps. X is a random variable and area under the curve is equal to 1. What do we mean by that? Let's see. So this is what it turned out to be, right? So these are some of the curves, like the yellow curve and the cyan and the indigo and the magenta. So all these are different normal distribution curve, right? So then x is the value that it can take. It can take both positive and negative values, and it's a very smooth function, unlike any other probability distribution functions or the PDFs that we have gone through. Like, this is a very smooth function. That is the beauty of this, and most of the natural data tend to follow this distribution, unlike any other distributions that we may come across. So here, in this particular case, these three curves, they have that mean value to be 0. Whereas this particular curve, the distribution is more skewed towards the -2, -2. So that is what tells me the mean, basically. And also there is a parameter called as variance. If you take a root, like, it becomes a standard deviation, more or less, like, they represent one and the same, except for the value changes. So if we tend to take this particular variance, the variance of this yellow curve is only 0.2, whereas if I do take this particular blue curve, the variance is quite large. Henceforth, the spread is also quite large. So nevertheless, the area under the curve remains same, and it's of unit area. Why? Because we have this normalizing factor in the given equation, which actually helps us to retain the area under the curve to be same, immaterial or whatever it is. This is the nature of the normal distribution curve that we have to deal with in case of the speech signal also. So now all this while we are talking about univariate Gaussian. Likewise, when I spoke about the speech, it's not made up of single random variable, but it is a feature vector of certain dimension d, right? So if we take the feature vector of certain dimension d, which I said, like, it's around 39 dimension, what we use in speech, so that becomes a feature vector. Then transpose it, and we can have n number of such feature vectors for a given class, let's say bubble R. So then we can always calculate the mean vector of the same dimension d. So that becomes the mean feature vector, which is also at times represented as expectation of x, which is a vector of dimension d. Then apart from the variance, whatever we have of dimension d, here we get the concept of covariance matrix, right? So variance not only with reference to the same dimension as that is represented in the diagonal elements, but also we are keen and we are interested to know what are the relationship between other dimensionality of the given feature vector. Say for instance, what is the relationship between x1 and x2, x1 and x3, x1 and xd, right? So all such details are captured in this particular covariance matrix, and generally it is represented by this particular symbol called as sigma. So this is a beautiful matrix. It has a wealth of information as far as the data distribution is concerned, and this is what will help us to classify the speech signal into its corresponding units. So let's extend that particular equation, whatever we had seen with reference to univariate Gaussian, to a multivariate Gaussian. The multivariate Gaussian function looks like this. Now, instead of raised to the power of square root, here it is raised to the reference, here raised to the dimension of d, and we have determinant of the sigma function, and we have inverse of the covariance matrix, whatever we had, and x minus mu transpose and x minus mu basically. So this is one internal kernel. So basically what it has done, it has converted that distribution function into a distance metric function basically. So if we look at the internal kernel, this is nothing but the Mahalanobis distance. What is that we are calculating? We are measuring the distance between an unknown feature vector to that of the mean vector. We know how do we calculate the mean vector of a given distribution, right? Take the difference of it, transpose it, multiply it with the inverse of a covariance matrix, and multiply it with this term. So totally it gives us the distance between the feature vector and the mean vector of that particular distribution. So in a sense, we have essentially converted the base relationship to a Gaussian multivariate function, and multivariate function internally in turn represents the distance between the unknown feature vector and the mean feature vector. Now there is certain relationship. If we take two such feature vector dimension, then there is a relationship between the two dimensions. Say for instance, here in this case, that Gaussian Gaussian bell curve can be thought in a three-dimensional inference, and they essentially get represented by these also isocontour lines. Isocontour lines essentially tells like what are the distance between that mean point to that of the circumference or the rings that I have in these isocontours, the Gaussian mixtures, right? So for instance, here in this case, if x and y are perfectly decorrelated, this is the relationship what we get. So wherein standard deviation of x is same as standard deviation of y. So there can be other case also wherein sigma x can be greater than sigma y. In a sense, the deviation I think it's flipped. So this y has to be x and x has to be y. You take it in that spirit. So here, if sigma x is larger, so here, as I told, this is x, and the standard deviation of the x is quite larger compared to the y. This is how this particular shape of the Gaussian bell looks like. So, and they can also have certain linear relationship. So here, the correlation is not zero. The correlation between x and y is higher. So that's where we tend to get this thing. And if it is still higher, almost like it tend to appears like a single straight line, basically. If there is a high degree of correlation between the dimensionality of the feature vectors, right? So then likewise they can also be negative negative correlation. So these are some of the nature of the Gaussian mixtures that we can expect depending on the nature of the features that we have extracted. Now let's come to Gaussian mixture models. Even before that, if we get here basically, so this is particular multivariate Gaussian function, and it's not quite possible to model the complex data like speech using single Gaussian multivariate function. In a sense, we require lot many such Gaussian multivariate, and that's when we tend to call them as mixture of Gaussians, basically. So we can model that particular complicated data by mixture of Gaussians, and there essentially we try to model the parameters of the Gaussian mixtures. So what do we mean by the parameters of those Gaussian mixtures? As I told, mean is one of the parameters. Likewise, variance is also one of the parameters. But when it comes to mixture of Gaussians, another parameter gets added that is called as the weights of the Gaussian mixtures. In a sense, different Gaussian multivariate functions do tend to get cumulatively added to represent one such cluster of a speech data. So in a sense, we are using multiple such Gaussian mixtures to represent the cluster of the data, right? So, and essentially, we tend to represent them in the form of P of X semicolon, that is given the parameters like mu is a vector, right? Comma sigma. Sigma tend to represent the variance of the model. Then also the parameter called as pi. Pi is nothing but the weights of the Gaussian mixture, to what extent each of those Gaussian mixtures are contributing to the modeling of this particular feature vectors. Anyway, now it seems like confusing, but afternoon when I begin with the practical session, I'll demonstrate you in the MATLAB how exactly these Gaussian mixtures looks like and how it actually helps us to model the speech data. Yeah. So, it's quite possible to find the solution or find out the parameters of this model using maximum likelihood estimation or ML estimation. But the problem with that ML estimation is at seldom we do have the closed form solution for this particular equation. So that's where we tend to rely on an iterative approach, especially called as expectation maximization algorithm, through which like we tend to find the parameters of the given model. This is what I was saying when it comes to finding the parameters with the maximum likelihood estimation or ML estimation. How do we find it? Basically, apply the log for this given equation, that is P of X given mean and variance of a given model. So apply the log, natural log. So then the equation turns out to be this. Now apply a partial differentiation, because the parameters what we are essentially interested is the mean and the variance. Apply the partial differentiation and equate it to 0 and try to solve the problem. So this is what it appears to be. So 1 over n summation of all those feature vectors that I've considered, wherein feature vectors are anywhere varying from 1 to capital N. So it's easy and it's very trivial to calculate the mean of a feature vector that is given by mu, right? Then we do have variance, the covariance matrix, which we can calculate using this relationship. That is 1 over n, the summation n equals 1 to n. So calculate this particular kernel, which essentially turns out to be a Euclidean distance. So this is a special case of one of the Mahalanobis distance, right? Yeah. So if this covariance turns out to be 1, and anyway, so using, as I say, so all problems will not have solutions in this closed form, especially when it comes to data as complicated as speech. So that's where this expectation maximization algorithm comes into picture. It is a iterative algorithm which helps us to find the parameters which are mu and sigma. Let's see what are those steps are. And to begin with, there's an initial guess that is made about the parameters of the probability distribution that I'm trying to estimate, right? So what are those initial guess that I need to take? I need to take the guess on mean and also the variance. So I'll initialize with some random values to begin with. And this is called as the expectation step or the E step, right? So then there is a newly observed data that gets fed into the model. So as soon as we feed the new data observation to this particular model, there are change in the parameters that happens. For instance, there is change in the mean, there is a change in the variance, and this happens in the step called as maximization step. So I'm maximizing the parameters basically. So then steps 2 through 4 are repeated until unless there is no major change that happens with reference to the parameter values. So this is how we stop the iterations. So there are two ways to stop the iterations. One is that if there is no change at all, so just keep on going through these steps of 2 to 4, or you fix the maximum number of steps basically. So there are two ways to stop this iteration. And there we go. We would have found the mean and also the sigma. Of course, there's another parameter called as pi. If you can ignore that, so mean and covariance matrix can be estimated using this expectation maximization algorithm. Yeah. So how does this work basically? So it's as simple as this. Why at all we require this EM algorithm? So that is the question at hand. So if at all, let's take one dimensional data. Let's take these yellow rings and blue rings. So if and a priori I know what is the color of these rings, then calculating mean and variance is not a big deal, right? So take those yellow color balls or yellow color rings and divide it by the sum all those values and normalize it with the number of blue color rings or blue color this thing. We can easily calculate the mean and variance. So here it is mu b. So from the blue, I calculate mean of the blue and subtract all those from the corresponding features. I get to calculate the mean and variance easily. And it's quite trivial. If I know those, there are two Gaussians, two classes that I need to put the rings into, yellow and blue, and it's quite trivial and it's quite possible to find out. What if I don't know which color that particular unknown ball belongs to? Blindly, I want to classify that particular ring into one of these two classes. So that's the problem at hand. Say, for instance, if I look at the frame, I don't get to know speech frame. I don't get to know what is that particular sound unit is all about. Because waveform is pretty random in its structure, and I won't be able to get to know like what is that sound unit it belongs to. That's where rather than finding it out, what if I try to extract what model has generated this particular speech frame? So it's called as generative models. So there are pre-existing models, and let me try and find out like which particular model this speech frame has been generated from. So is what I try to essentially model in case of speech recognition. So this is the problem at hand. All right. So to begin with, I don't know which source it belongs to. Everything appears blank. So then how do I calculate the mean? How do I calculate the variance? And I know there are two classes, and there is no way to proceed. So this is the typical problem. Nor I know anything. If I knew mean, if I knew variance, I could have calculated what each of these feature belongs to. But I don't know that, and nor I know what generated this particular. So that is a typical chicken egg problem I have at hand. So to begin with, I have to begin with some Gaussian of certain mean and certain variance. So take that first mean, add some epsilon, Likewise, take some random variance, add some epsilon, and generate a second Gaussian. There are two Gaussians. Now, all these have to be assigned to both of these classes in a soft clustering fashion, in a probabilistic sense. So that is, each ring either in probabilistic sense belongs to yellow as well as blue. In what sense to calculate? Take all those. Quite obviously, going by this one-dimensional axis, most of the blue color will have a higher probability of representation in case of blue PDF rather than the yellow one. So then assign those and recalculate the mean and variance. So there will be readjustment that happens in the maximization step. So once that happens, there we go, like, right? No more the mean remains same. Yellow remains more or less like pretty much in the same position, whereas the blue would have got changed. Why? Because now if I calculate the mean using these particular rings, then quite obviously the mean of the blue PDF is somewhere here. It's not here. So that's where the shifting happens. And moreover, there's a big spread of that blue, right, distribution. Henceforth, there's a wider distribution as far as the blue is concerned. So keep on iterating such things, and there comes like we would have come with the good results or good estimation of those parameters like mean and variance of these Gaussian. And that's how essentially it happens in case of speech signal also. It's quite easy to represent them on one-dimensional axis, but it's quite cumbersome for us to imagine when we are talking about 39-dimensional. Nevertheless, in principle, this is what is happening in there as well, right? So this is to speak with the Gaussian mixture models. We are trying to estimate the parameters of mean, variance, and the weights. Whereas when it comes to speech signal, this is how a typical spectrogram of a speech signal looks like. So if this is the spectrogram of the given speech signal, now we can imagine if I do chunk that speech signal into small chunks of frames and then try to estimate like what is the speech that is uttered, then it becomes quite difficult. Why? Because we completely can't take it in a face value that each frames are independent and they have no relationship to the adjacent frames. So speech doesn't gets generated in that sense. So this particular frame is dependent on the future frame and also the post frame. So that is how these spectrogram looks like. Say for instance, this is a word called as Thiruvananthapuram. So in this Thiruvananthapuram, if we tend to see, these are nothing but the formands of the speech signal. And we can notice that the formands are varying. The formands are varying. So typically we need to model this. How we can model this? So we can't deal with the Gaussian mixtures to model when there is a sequential data like a speech signal. So that's where this hidden Markov model comes into picture. So we have to bring the time state also into consideration while we build the models. So that's where this hidden Markov model comes into picture. So essentially, I can if I take a simple phoneme, say T or Ru, let's take U itself, this U itself. Let me just plot it as the striations of the formands. This is how it looks like. So wherein the x-axis is frequency and y-axis is the y-axis. This is the time. Sorry, this is the x-axis is the time and y-axis is the frequency. And the darker the band, it denotes the magnitude. Higher the magnitude, it appears much darker. So if we tend to plot such striations, so then the speech phoneme can be regarded as the beginning state, and there is a stable state of the phoneme where there is no much variations, and there is a transition state to the next phoneme basically. So in a sense, the phoneme can be divided into three such time states. So the beginning state, the middle state, and the transition state to the next state. So there's a beginning arrow which gets connected to the first state, and the second state, and the third state, and it exits basically. So basically, we are modeling the time. using this hidden Markov model. So in a sense, there is certain duration of time with which this first state remains. So that is essentially captured by the self loop here in this case. And there is certain probability that it makes a transition from first state to second state, right? That is all given by A12. They're all the arcs which are connected by certain values that are nothing but A11, A12, A23. Likewise, there is A13. So essentially, I can regard this particular thing as state 1, this particular thing as state 2, and this particular thing as state 3. In a sense, the phoneme is undergoing a transition from the beginning state or the state transition from this state, the first state, to the second state and third state. And also likewise, it remains in the same state for certain duration of time, right? So that is all captured by the self transition loop. And there's a transition loop from state 1 to 2 and state 2 to 3, and likewise there is a state transition from 1 to 3, and altogether it can start from state 2. So all such things happen when we tend to speak, right? Because we don't exclusively give so much interest, so much time, so we pronounce it so clearly, we speak so fast, or even if we try to speak so legibly, all these things can happen in the speech. So basically, how long I should remain well within the state 1 itself is all captured by this self loop, and it is given by a value of A11. Likewise, how many times there is a transition, when it has to transit from state 1 to state 2 is all captured by A12. They're all nothing but the probabilistic values again. And what does each of those state gets modeled as? Each of those state gets modeled as the probability distribution function, especially using Gaussian mixture models. So typically speaking, practically we make use of 8 to 16 Gaussian mixtures to model one such state. So then each of these transitions are captured by the transition probability matrix. So for instance, A11, that is self loop transition for the state 1 itself, then 2 to 2, 3 to 3. Likewise, what is the transition value from 1 to 2, 2 to 1? It's a symmetric matrix anyways. So we can ignore the lower diagonal elements and retain only the upper diagonal elements. And there could be skip probabilities as well, wherein, as I told, it can all of a sudden begin with the second state, or all of a sudden it can begin with the third state. That's where this initial probabilities also comes into picture. Essentially, I can model hidden Markov models using 3 parameters. One is the A, which is called the transition probability, and B, which are called the parameters of that particular state, which is essentially governed by the Gaussian mixture model parameters, which we discussed in length. And there are initial probabilities. So put together, all these 3 things basically helps us to model the speech using hidden Markov model. And the kind of algorithms basically goes into estimating these parameters of the hidden Markov model are the Baum-Welch re-estimation algorithm, especially during the training phase, and while decoding, we tend to use the Viterbi decoding. So, which is quite a complicated algorithm to explain within. To introduce you to the topics of speech recognition and the essential algorithms that basically goes to realize this speech recognition, starting from the feature vector to the modeling. So once we have modeled this, we can feed an unknown feature vector to this model, and then always calculate the posterior probability and assign one of those class of the phonemes that we have essentially modeled, say 30 to 40 different models, and say which particular phoneme it belongs to. So it doesn't stop here, and all the models what I explained does cater for only acoustic modeling of the speech recognition. Then on top, we do tend to apply the language model as well. Anyway, language model is not in the scope of the session what I'm dealing with. There is there is a great deal of algorithm that also goes to prepare the language model. That is, it applies the penalties on top of the acoustic model output and say this is the word spoken, this is the sentence spoken. So these are the sequence of phonemes basically. So all these things will be derived out of the automatic speech recognition. So with that, like, I'll stop. Hopefully I've done some justification to introduce you to the topics of feature extraction, the reference to speech, took you through what is machine learning basics is all about, introduced you k nearest neighborhood algorithm, said the drawbacks of those, and came to Gaussian mixtures. And then I've introduced you to why hidden Markov model is necessary and what parameters that we are interested in order to develop the speech recognition. So in the second half of the session, I'll take you through the MATLAB version of how do we model whatever we have spoken now, and what is the benefit of adding each of those things and how it helps improve the speech recognition. So with that, I'll stop at this point. Questions, if there are one or two, I can handle. If not so, then I may require 5 to 10 minutes, wherein Ms. Shruti shall explain what all things that are required to install the Kaldi on your own system. So by the time we come back at 3 o'clock, I assume that you people have those models installed in your machines. Any questions?
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shruti, and I'll just currently just brief you up of how to install the Kaldi. So the main requirements are like you should be having Ubuntu. So it can be anything above 16.04 version. So as mentioned in this document, so you need to clone the official Kaldi repository from the GitHub link. So if you give us git clone, and this is the official link of the Kaldi. So once you type this command as shown in the figure here, so yeah, it will directly clone. Yeah, tell me.
Ma'am, it is not for Windows.
No, it's not for Windows. So you need Ubuntu, or if you I have not tried this, but in Sigwin, I think in Windows, if you can have a Linux virtual platform, right? So there probably you can do, but it might require some memory. So I'm not sure. I've not tried in Windows. So because it's all like we use Linux systems only for this. So meanwhile, maybe I'll just check if you can do it in Windows. You have, I think, VirtualBox also, no? I think some Oracle VirtualBox. So there also, I
Yes,
think,
ma'am.
yeah. So I'll just check if you can do it in Windows. I've not tried it.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So you'll be cloning the Kaldi repository here, and then so once you clone the repository, so in your home you get Kaldi folder, and inside the Kaldi folder you have all these folders. So the next step would be to install certain dependencies of Kaldi. So if you go into if you just go into this tools directory as shown in the second step, so you can find install here if you're able to see. So in that those commands have put it down here also. So if you want, you can check it there also. So first you will check whether any dependencies are needed for installing Kaldi. So you type this extras check dependencies.sh command. So if all the dependencies are correct, so it will print as okay. And then only after getting all the, okay, you have to proceed further. So if it shows that some dependencies are required, so please, and it will also give the command for installing. So please install that and then proceed when everything is okay. So then after it is okay, then you run the make command. So once you run the make command, it will install all the necessary items for Kaldi, like the OpenFST and the Atlas headers. So all the SCTK, that is the scoring toolkit, and this pipe, SPH2 pipe, all these will be installed. And after installing all this, you will get again a message saying that it's all done okay. Okay, and then next you will this is a language model. So currently I'm not using this language model, so it's okay that you can skip this. But later, if you are if you are working on this and you need a language model, you can install this extras IRSTL. So this is a kind of language model provided by Kaldi. So you can install this, and then you after doing all this, then you have to run this make command. Okay, so make command, and this will install, and this will make the folder, tools folder. So the same is in the SRC directory. So if you go back from tools folder, you will find a folder called as SRC. This is the source. So here all the Kaldi binaries will be stored. So then you will go to the source folder and follow these three commands. You'll run these three commands in the terminal, and and your Kaldi will be installed. And after your Kaldi will be installed, so please go to this. You'll find an EGS folder inside the Kaldi in home. So and then we'll be working on this mini Libri speech. So that corpus. So you can go to this directory, inside this directory, and please install the flag. Sudo apt get install flag, because all the files of audio files of mini Libri speech are in this flag format. So you need to install this. And then I have shared the corpus of this mini Libri speech. So if you go to, I have sent, there is a Google Drive link here. So when you go to that link, you will find the corpus zip file and this run script. So please copy both of these things inside this directory, the mini Libri speech S5 directory, and you unzip this corpus file. So these are the instructions. So please let me know if you have any doubts.
I request the participants to make use of this drive link and get your things to be installed on your Ubuntu. So if you are unable, anyhow, madam will be showing a live demo using the Linux platform. There, if you have, you can see once, learn, and then you can try at your end. Once again, sir, participants, if
Yeah,
you are
yeah.
having any questions, you please hold on your questions for the next session. There you can clarify your doubts. I think that would be more suitable after seeing the demo. Then it will be clarified. If not, you can get the information from the sir. Okay, sir. Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Deepak sir. It was a great session to hear from you regarding all the basics like distributions, modeling, parameter distribution, clustering algorithms, distance measures, and multivariate and univariate Gaussian mixtures, and why these models are used, when we are supposed to use, how these models are used to extract the speech parameters, how better these models are used in modeling the speech signal, and what are the importance of acoustic modeling and where actually language modeling top ups. All these were very much informative, sir. We look forward for the next session eagerly to see all these in detail, and hope that will help us also and our participants also in understanding the recognition system and building it, sir. So we will
Yeah,
thank you once again on the behalf of the college and the department. We thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and delivering such a great and nice talk, sir. Thank you so much,
thank
sir.
you, ma'am.
So,
Thank you,
sir, we
ma'am.
shall meet around 3 o'clock, sir.
Sure, sure. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir.